What's going on, guys? I'm Tim Kelly. This is Phillies Stoplight, and I want to deviate a little bit from the normal format of the show today. Phillies obviously are going to come back for this final homestand of the season to uninspiring opponents in the Marlins and the Twins. Not that they don't have anything to play for, the Phillies. They still do need to secure the number 2 seed, which comes with the bye. Increasingly, after losing 2 of 3 this weekend in Arizona, it seems unlikely they're going to get the number 1 seed, but they're still in pretty good position to get one of those 2 first-round byes. And I think that's the most important thing, getting that and staying healthy this week. But it appears the way things are trending that they could play 1 of 4 opponents. And I want to go through each. This is assuming they get the first round bye, and talk about who would be the best and worst possible opponents in the NLDS the Phillies would host, regardless of what team they're playing here. If they get the number 2 seed, the Phillies would host games 1 and 2. Then they would go to the opposing stadium for 3 and 4 and have the possibility to come back to Citizens Bank Park if there is a game 5. Same format as last year. They played 1 and 2 in Philly and then lost 3 and 4 in New York, and that was that. But they had home field advantage, and they're going to be in a similar situation this year. I think the most obvious, most likely opponent here is going to be the Los Angeles Dodgers, although it's been weird. The Phillies and Dodgers have both been the 2 power brokers in the NL the last few years, and somehow they've avoided meeting in the postseason. Despite a pretty lengthy history in the postseason between these 2 teams, recently they have not seen each other. The pros in this situation to me are pretty clear. The Phillies are 4-2 against the Dodgers this year. They clinched the NL East in Los Angeles. Even last year they played pretty well. I remember Dave Dombrowski saying in his spring training opening address this year, talking about, hey, we played really well against the Dodgers last regular season, just didn't get the chance to play them in the postseason. Now, that was their own doing, but they did play well there. Going to LA hasn't been a huge problem. Shohei Ohtani performed pretty well in this past series, but hasn't done much in his career at Citizens Bank Park, and I may be jinxing that, but there are some pros that would make you think, even though the Dodgers are the defending World Series champions, the Phillies would be the favorites to win this series. Another pro is that the Dodgers bullpen, unlike last year when it was really good in the postseason, is a complete disaster right now. Tanner Scott has been awful this season. He's got a 4.64 ERA. And Blake Trinan, who was a playoff hero for them again last year, I thought in free agency might have made sense for the Phillies. I was a little surprised he got 2 years, and ultimately giving 2 years to a 37-year-old that has had a history of some injuries didn't end up being the wisest decision probably for the Dodgers, but he's had a really rough month. He's somebody that can be electric when he's healthy. But this has just really been the problem for the Dodgers. Even as they've had successes, they've had so much trouble keeping their pitching healthy. And the starting rotation in theory could be a positive, but you're just not sure. Shohei Ohtani, 5 no-hit innings against the Phillies this year, but who knows what type of leash he'll have on the mound in the postseason as he continues to work back from his 2nd major elbow surgery. Clayton Kershaw has had a really strong year, and this is going to be his final season, obviously, but he does not have a great playoff track record. And realistically, I don't know how many innings you're expecting from him in a start at this point in the playoffs. I think he's like, if you get 4 solid innings from him in the postseason, that might be good. Tyler Glasnow's always been a really talented pitcher that can't stay healthy. Blake Snell is someone that actually has performed pretty well in the playoffs. Kind of got a bad rap from Kevin Cash pulling him early in the 2020 World Series, but he can be erratic too with walks. And has had some injuries this year. Yamamoto's had a tremendous season for the Dodgers, so Yamamoto would be a tough out. And if the Dodgers have their full starting staff healthy, it would be a tough opponent in the postseason. But the way that their pitchers go through injuries, you don't know until the second the game is being played what the starting rotation is going to look like. So those are some of the potential pros for the Phillies. I would put the starting rotation kind of in a murky in-between because they don't really have a horse. They have a lot of really talented guys, but they're also guys that if you told me they laid an egg in a big postseason game, it wouldn't surprise me. Now, the con, obviously, they're the reigning World Series champions, and people used to say this with LeBron, and not that it didn't happen in the playoffs, but it was hard at LeBron's peak to imagine beating him 4 times in 7 games. Like, if you did it, you were going to have to use every bullet you had in the chamber, basically, to win that series. And the Dodgers have such a talented lineup. Now, Will Smith has a fracture in his right hand. That's a huge development if he's limited in any way or if he's not available for this series. But Shohei Ohtani is the best hitter in the National League, certainly. I don't know. I'm not going to take him over Aaron Judge or I'll leave it at Aaron Judge. Cal Raleigh's had a great season. I'm not going to take him over Aaron Judge, but one of the great hitters in the sport today, one of the greatest hitters we've ever seen. Freddie Freeman's headed to the Hall of Fame. Mookie Betts has had an uncharacteristic year, but has been better in the second half. That's a tough group, and that's without mentioning Teoscar Hernandez and some of the other pieces they have. So while you can imagine the Phillies beating the Dodgers, it's still probably not the team you want to see the most. Now, the Mets are an interesting team because a month ago, I think most Phillies fans in an honest moment would have said the Mets are the team you least want to see of any possible NLDS opponent. And I think a month ago, people didn't think the Phillies would have the bye, would win the division this comfortably over the Mets after they played so poorly in Citi Field. The pros in a potential matchup with the Mets are the Phillies just swept them in Philly, and obviously 3 out of 5 games would be in Philly. Now, that didn't help them last year, but you have that. The Mets also would be limping into the playoffs. The thing is, though, the Mets, in a way, limped into the playoffs last year, and they were kind of the example of if you get hot, who knows what happens. But all their veterans have been bad. All their starting pitching veterans have been bad in the second half. Kodai Senga had to accept an option to AAA. That's how bad he's been. Sean Manaea's just really never gotten going this year. Clay Holmes, the amount of innings he's pitching in his first year, moved from the bullpen, that's catching up to him. I feel like I'm missing a guy or two, but regardless, the Mets have not done, their veterans in the starting rotation have not pitched the way you would expect. Now, Nolan McLean, Jonah Tong, Sprout, you have some exciting young rookies, but they have no postseason experience, so it's really a wild card with them. And I thought that this would be a team that had a great bullpen after the trade deadline, but Ryan Helsley has been a disaster for them. So I think the way things are going, the Mets are not going to make the playoffs. I will say if they do get in, one of the cons is the Mets have the Phillies number at Citi Field. There's no other way to put it. It's not just last postseason. It's in the regular season the last few years. That has been a tough place for whatever reason for the Phillies to go, and you can't tell me that won't be in their minds because I know how these things work. There's a workout day where players meet with the media before a playoff series. There's pregame media availabilities before every series with star players. Whether they want to block it out or not, it will be a huge storyline how poorly the Phillies have played at Citi Field in this series, especially if the Phillies don't win both of those first 2 games at Citizens Bank Park. So that's certainly going to be something to monitor. And Juan Soto quietly has been great. I don't think he's going to leapfrog Kyle Schwarber in MVP voting. And I think Ohtani's going to win the MVP. But Soto, to me, him and Paul Skeens are competing for that number 3 spot. He's been great. Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo. This is a lineup that in a short series, and if Mark Vientos is healthy, he's killed the Phillies. This is a lineup that in a short series can out-hit the Phillies, and you can wake up and for the second year in a row, you're done after the NLDS. So the Mets, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs. My gut tells me even if they do make the playoffs, it's just not their year. They don't have that same magic as last year. But given how the Phillies have played specifically in New York, I think that matchup would still give you a little bit of trepidation. The Cincinnati Reds are an interesting team because their lineup, this is a pro for the Phillies, really isn't that good. Ellie De La Cruz has struggled in the second half. Matt McClain and Spencer Steer haven't panned out the way you would hope, and they may still, but there's just too many guys that you're unsure of in this lineup. And for a team that plays its home games at Great American Ballpark, which lots of the MLB park factors say is as hitter-friendly a park as any, the Reds really don't have an imposing offense. I also look at this series and think Kyle Schwarber, A, relishes the chance to play in the postseason period. He's 4th in MLB history in postseason home runs. He's tied with Bryce Harper for the most postseason home runs in Phillies history. So wherever the Phillies play in the NLDS, assuming they're in the NLDS, Kyle Schwarber is going to relish that opportunity. But I think specifically he would relish the chance to play against the team he grew up rooting for and to potentially finish off the series in Cincinnati would be a cool thing for him. So You would get the storyline again of will the Reds pursue Kyle Schwarber in the offseason, so that would maybe be the trade-off there. But I would be shocked if you have games in Cincinnati in the postseason and Kyle Schwarber isn't going yard in them. It feels too obvious. The flip side of that is that what also feels obvious, especially if the Phillies are going to use 3 lefties, is Austin Hayes having like a Cody Ross type series, and maybe he becomes an ultimate playoff villain. He already was responsible for preventing Zach Wheeler from throwing that no-hitter earlier in the year. So that's kind of scary. I would also say the pitching trio of Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, and Andrew Abbott is about as good of a trio, if those guys are healthy, as you're going to see in the postseason. And it's one of the few, I think, that can go toe-to-toe with what the Phillies have to offer and maybe even be better than it, depending on how they pitch. Nick Lodolo specifically has been really tough on the Phillies. Andrew Abbott's a lefty, so that would be intimidating, I think, in a sense. And Terry Francona is as experienced as anyone. Now, at this point, Rod Thompson has a wealth of postseason experience, both as like a third base and bench coach and now as a manager. So there's not going to be too many things that present themselves that he hasn't seen at this point in a playoff game. But Terry Francona is not somebody you want to match up with in the postseason. Won 2 World Series in Boston, got to a Game 7 in Cleveland, which was one of the greatest games of all time. They ended up on the wrong end of it, but not a guy, a future Hall of Famer that you necessarily would want to match up with early in the postseason, because, again, in these shorter series, it's a lot easier for a team to steal a game or two and all of a sudden they win the series than in a 7-game series where you got to get 4 wins. If you only have to get 3 wins and, maybe you get lucky on one and you only really have to, find a way to hold on for 2 games and maybe you blow them out in 1 game, I think it becomes scarier when you look across to the other dugout and Terry Francona's there. The final team is the team the Phillies just ended up playing, or just played over the weekend, the Diamondbacks. And the pros to me is, on paper, there's no debate about these 2 rosters. The Diamondbacks have lost Corbin Burns, Justin Martinez, and A.J. Puck to Tommy John surgery. That's on top of Jordan Montgomery having it before the season, before he even got a chance to have a rebound year. They traded Eugenio Suarez, Shelby Miller, Josh Naylor, and Merrill Kelly before the trade deadline because they were out of it. So on paper, there's no debate. But the Phillies just lost 2 of 3 in Arizona. If the Diamondbacks get in, they're going to be hot. They're going to have an underdog energy, not that dissimilar to what they had 2 years ago. And Arizona, both in the 2023 NLDS, or NLCS, I should say, and in general in the regular season the last few years, it has been a house of horrors for the Phillies, as much or maybe even more than Citi Field. And it's the least favorite stadium I've been to because it's dark. I hate that center field wall. I think it's ridiculous the other night that Ketel Marte can hit a double that goes 421 feet. How is that not a home run? But you have this center field where there's not a wall. You just have to hit it over a line there. You don't really know until it hits whether it's going over the line because the stadium is so dark you can't track the ball. I just hate it. And it's a place where the outfield is so big, you can just wear out those gaps with doubles. And a team that's not necessarily better can walk away and win because as much as it's a stadium that I don't like, it's not like the Marlins Stadium, Lone Depot Park, or Texas, or one of these modern stadiums that has no character. There's lots of character to this one. I don't necessarily like the character, but it's a tough place to go in. Now, you would have 1 and 2 at home, but you had 1 and 2 at home in 2023. You won those and still ended up losing the series. Granted, it was a 7-game format, not a 5-game format, but I don't know. I don't necessarily think that's a place that the Phillies would want to go. Now, I think talent-wise, there's just an overwhelming advantage to me that the Diamondbacks are still probably the best matchup for the Phillies. None of these matchups do I feel great about, but the Diamondbacks, they give you the concern because of the stadium. I still think the talent discrepancy is so big, though, that they'd be the best matchup for the Phillies. The Mets, kind of the same thing. They'd be the second best matchup for the Phillies in my mind, even though you have concerns about going into Citi Field, because they don't have the vibe going into the playoffs. And granted, they didn't get the vibe last year until the final few days of the regular season, really, although they had played really well in the second half last year, and they haven't this year. They've been the opposite. So I think those are 2 teams where you're just counting on the fact that you're so much better than them to carry out. The Reds, to me, would actually be, out of these teams, the second worst playoff matchup. And that might surprise some people, but the starting pitching is really good for them. And that, especially in a best-of-5 series, is concerning. And then the Dodgers, to me, would still be the worst. But the thing I would say is entering any of these series, including against the Dodgers, who nationally will probably get favored over the Phillies, but I would feel like going into any of these series, I would expect the Phillies to win. Now, there is some rust factor, I think, after having that week off. I don't think it's as serious as the Braves made it out to be, but you do need to find a way to stay sharp during that week and hope you hit the ground running in Game 1. I mean, they hit the ground running last year. Kyle Schwarber hit the first pitch he saw into the stands, and they still lost that Game 1. So there was a little bit of rust last year. I think the bigger problem is the bullpen just imploded in the series, as opposed to the Phillies having had a week off. But there's going to be some challenges, but I think going into the NLDS, assuming, again, that is the first playoff series for the Phillies, they're going to be the favorites regardless of which of these 4 teams they play. But each of them will present different questions and concerns that the Phillies need to address in this series. Bottom line, in the playoffs, you're going to see some tough teams. You're going to go into some tough environments, and to win it all, you're going to have to come out of those not unscathed, but having got the better end of the other team. So we'll see if the Phillies can do that this year. They've obviously come close in 2022 and 2023. You felt as good as you have going into a postseason last year. It didn't work out. This year kind of feels like the last chance with some of the guys in this group to really do this. So we'll see what happens. No matter what, we will have it all covered on Pattison.com.